Before we begin, comment below, which city are you watching from and what time is it there now? In 1892, in the interior of the province of Entre Ríos, Argentina, 3 men entered a forest before nightfall. None of them returned. There were no screams, there were no signs of a struggle, there were no bodies. All that remained was this, a black felt hat found 3 days later, hanging from a low branch, and a note in one of their diaries, written on the morning of their disappearance, in firm handwriting. "We're going to get what was left behind. We'll be back before dinner." They didn't come back for dinner. They never came back. The story you are about to hear is not a legend. It is not folklore. It is a documented case, recorded in the archives of the Comisaría Rural de Gualeguaychú, preserved on yellowed paper, faded ink, and testimonies transcribed by hand by a clerk who, according to records, requested a transfer shortly after completing the report. He never explained why. The 3 men were named Eliseo Vargas, Matias Ibarra, and Tomás Acuña. Eliseo was 41 years old. He was a carpenter. He had large hands, a broad back, and a thick gray beard. He was married to Clara and had 4 children. He was a man of few words, but he kept his word. Everyone in the village knew that if Eliseo promised something, he would deliver. Matias, 37, was a blacksmith. He had been a widower for 2 years. He lived alone in a wooden house next to his workshop. He drank too much on Saturday nights, but he worked without fail. He had a deep scar on his left arm, a gift from a nervous horse when he was young. Tomás was the youngest, 29 years old, Eliseo's assistant, the only child of a French mother who had died in childbirth, and a father who had disappeared when he was 5. Tomás was quiet. He read books that no one understood. He used to spend hours looking at the river, smoking his pipe, without saying a word. They weren't close friends, but they trusted each other. The village where they lived was called Pueblo del Saus. It no longer exists. Today there are only stone foundations covered with tall grass and 2 brick walls that have stood the test of time. In 1892, Pueblo del Saus had 120 inhabitants, a small wooden church, a school with 12 children, a store that sold everything: sugar, kerosene, tobacco, fabric, gunpowder. The village was 6 kilometers from the Gualeguaychú River, surrounded by low fields and a dense strip of native forest to the west. An ancient forest. Twisted trees, thick vines, ground covered with damp leaves that never completely dried. The elders called that place El Monte Silencioso, the silent forest. Not out of superstition, but because inside that forest, the birds hardly ever sang. On April 23, 1892, a Friday, Eliseo Vargas entered Matias's workshop around 2 in the afternoon. He brought Tomás with him. According to the account of a neighbor, Don Aparicio Soto, who saw them pass by, Eliseo was carrying an axe. Matias had a rope slung over his shoulder. Tomás had an oil lantern. Aparicio asked where they were going. Eliseo replied, "To get some boards I left marked inside near the stream. We'll be back before dark." Aparicio nodded. He asked no further questions. This was the last confirmed account of the 3 men alive. Clara Vargas, Eliseo's wife, waited for her husband for dinner. At 7 o'clock in the evening, she lit the lamp. At 8, she put the children to bed. At 9, she went to the front door and stood on the threshold, looking at the empty road. There was no moon that night. Matias Ibarra had no one waiting for him. His house was dark. The forge was cold. Tomás Acuña's mother, who was not his biological mother but an aunt who had raised him, lit candles in the window. It was an old custom. She always did this when he went out. The candles burned until they were completely gone. He did not return. On Saturday morning, Clara went to Matias's house. She knocked on the door. No one answered. She looked for Tomás. He wasn't there either. At noon, a group of 8 men gathered. They took machetes, ropes, rifles. They entered Monte Silencioso, shouting the names of the missing. No one answered. On the 3rd day of searching, they found Eliseo's hat. It was intact, clean, no blood, no tears, hanging from a branch 1.5 meters above the ground, as if someone had carefully placed it there. Underneath the hat, On the damp, leaf-covered ground, there were no footprints. In the police station archives, there is a line that no one has been able to explain. It is written in a different handwriting from the rest of the report. Hurried handwriting. Smudged ink. It simply says, "The forest was too quiet," as if it were waiting. To understand what happened that April afternoon, we must go back 3 weeks. We must know the men as they were, not as they became later, names in a report, shadows in a forgotten story, but as they were when they still breathed, sweated, laughed, slept poorly, woke up early. Eliseo Vargas got up every day at 5 in the morning. He lit the fire. He prepared mate. He woke up his children. Clara said he never complained. Not about the cold, not about fatigue, not about the back pain that had plagued him since he fell off a roof 2 years earlier. He worked in the carpentry shop behind his house, a narrow shed, smelling of sawdust and varnish. Tomas had been working with him since he was 16. Eliseo had taught him how to measure, cut, and fit. He had also taught him not to waste wood. "Every board has a story," Eliseo would say. "If you cut it wrong, you lose the story." Tomas listened in silence. He learned slowly, but he learned well. Years later, Clara said that Eliseo loved Tomas as if he were his 5th son. He never said so out loud, but she knew. Matias Ibarra was different. He didn't talk about feelings. He hardly spoke at all. Since the death of his wife, typhoid fever in the winter of 1890, he had become even more withdrawn. The blacksmith's workshop was his only refuge. He hammered the hot metal as if he were striking something he couldn't name. He drank alone on Saturdays, at the bar, always in the same corner. 3 glasses of cognac, never 4. But he was a trustworthy man. When someone needed a sharp axe, a hinge repaired, a padlock reinforced, they went to Matias. And he never charged widows. Tomas Acuna was the enigma. Quiet, polite, dark eyes that always seemed to be far away. He read books in French that his mother had left behind. Poetry, philosophy. No one in the village understood it. Some found it strange, others just different. He never married, never dated, as far as anyone knew. He spent Sunday afternoons sitting on the riverbank, with his back to the village, smoking slowly. Once, Clara asked Eliseo, "Do you think Tomas is happy?" Eliseo thought about it. Then he replied, "I think he's looking for something, but he doesn't know what." Life in Pueblo del Sos was simple, but it wasn't easy. The harvests depended on the rain. The rain depended on God. And God, they said, was unpredictable. There were good years. There were bad years. 1892 was turning out to be a strange year. Spring had arrived late. The heat had arrived too early. The animals were restless. Dogs barked for no reason. Horses were frightened by the wind. Don Aparicio, the neighbor who had last seen the 3 men, said something in his statement that caught everyone's attention. The cows didn't want to graze near the hill. They stayed away, watching, as if they knew. The clerk took note, but he didn't comment. 3 weeks before the disappearance, Eliseo had returned alone from Silent Hill. He had gone there to mark trees. He needed wood for a large order, 10 doors, 6 windows, beams for a barn. When he returned, he was pale. Clara noticed. She asked what had happened. Eliseo took a while to answer. Then he said, "Nothing. It's strange in there." "Strange how?" "Too quiet." Clara waited, but he didn't explain further. That night, Eliseo didn't sleep well. Clara woke up at dawn and found him sitting in the kitchen, smoking, staring into space. He didn't say anything. She didn't insist. In the following days, Eliseo worked more slowly. He measured the boards he already had. He calculated how many were missing. He postponed his return to the mountain. Tomas asked, "Aren't we going to get the wood?" "We are, just not now." "Why?" Eliseo didn't answer, but the order had a deadline. The man who had ordered the doors and windows was from Gualeguaychú. He was coming to pick everything up at the end of April. He would pay well. Eliseo couldn't lose the job. So on Thursday, April 22nd, he decided, "We'll go tomorrow." Tomas nodded. Eliseo left the workshop and went to Matias's blacksmith shop. He asked him to come along. He needed someone strong to carry the larger boards, someone he could trust. Matthias looked at him. Then he asked, "Does it have to be tomorrow?" "Yes." Matthias dried his hands on his apron. He took a deep breath. "All right, I'll go." That night, Clara prepared dinner in silence. Eliseo ate little. She asked if he was all right. He smiled, a tired smile. "I'm fine." But he wasn't. Clara knew that. Before going to bed, she held his hand and said, "Come back soon." He kissed her forehead. "I'll be back before dinner." On the morning of Friday, April 23rd, Eliseo woke up before sunrise. He kissed his wife, who was still asleep. He looked at his children in the wooden bunk beds he had built himself. Then he left. Tomas was already waiting in the workshop. He had a lantern, a rope, a machete at his waist. The two walked to the blacksmith's shop. Matthias was at the door. He held the thick rope wrapped around his shoulder. He had a new axe in his hand, one he had forged himself the night before. He said nothing. He just nodded. The three of them followed the dirt road. They passed the store. They passed the church. They passed the last house in the village. Don Aparicio saw them. He asked where they were going. Eliseo answered. Then the three of them turned left and entered the narrow path that led to Silent Mountain. The sun was high, the sky was clear, the wind was still. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They had 4 hours of daylight. Enough time. It should have been enough. But something was wrong. Clara sensed it when Eliseo left the house. She couldn't explain it later. She just said, "I felt a tightness in my chest," as if he had forgotten something important. Tomas's aunt lit candles before noon. An old custom, she said. But the neighbors noticed. She had never done that so early. And Matthias left the forge lit. Something he never did. As if he knew he wouldn't be back to put it out. 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun was still high when the three men entered Silent Mountain. The path was familiar. Narrow but well marked. Trampled by years of comings and goings. Hunters used that route. Woodcutters too. No one got lost there. At least, they shouldn't have. According to calculations made later, based on Don Aparicio's testimony and the time Clara lit the lamp, Eliseo, Matthias, and Tomas had approximately 4 hours of daylight. Enough time to reach the stream, cut the marked boards, tie them together, and return before nightfall. Eliseo knew that forest well. He had marked the trees 3 weeks earlier. He knew exactly where they were. There was no reason for delay. There was no reason for fear. But something was different that afternoon. The men who formed the search party on Saturday, 8 in all, including Don Aparicio, the village priest, and the store owner, described the same feeling when they entered the woods. Silence. Not the usual silence of a forest, but a wrong silence. No birds, no insects, no wind in the leaves, as if the forest had held its breath. One of the men, named Eugenio Rochas, said in his statement, "We shouted their names, and the voice disappeared. It didn't echo, it didn't come back, it just died." The group found the path that Eliseo, Matthias, and Tomas must have taken. The boot prints were still visible in the damp earth. 3 pairs, firm footsteps, without hesitation. They followed the footprints for almost 2 kilometers to the point where the path split in 2. There, the marks stopped. They didn't disappear. They weren't erased. They just stopped, as if the 3 had been lifted off the ground. Eugenio Rochas, who had experience as a tracker, he had hunted for years in that region, examined the ground for almost an hour. He looked for signs of a struggle. Blood, drag marks, broken branches, nothing. He looked for animal tracks, jaguar, wild boar, anything, nothing. The ground was intact. The leaves were in place. The surrounding vegetation was undisturbed. It was as if 3 men had simply ceased to exist at that exact spot. On the second day of the search, they expanded the perimeter. They split into smaller groups. They covered every trail, every clearing, every stream bank. They shouted until they were hoarse. They fired shots into the air, 3 shots in a row, pause, 3 shots in a row. A prearranged signal. If anyone was lost, they would respond. No one responded. It was on the 3rd day that they found the hat. A black felt hat. Wide brim, sweat mark on the inner band. Eliseo wore that hat every day. Clara recognized it immediately when they brought it to her. It was hanging on a low branch about 2 miles from the village, far from the path they should have followed, far from the stream where the marked trees were. The hat was clean, dry, no mud, no leaves stuck to it, no blood. Hanging carefully as if someone had stopped, taken off the hat, and placed it there on purpose. Underneath it, on the ground covered with dead leaves, there were no footprints. None. Not even Eliseo's. Not anyone else's. Eugenio Rochas knelt down and examined the ground around him for over half an hour. He moved leaves aside. He poked the ground with a stick. He looked for any marks, any sign that someone had stepped there. Then he slowly stood up. He looked at the other men, and he simply said, "This doesn't make sense." No one disagreed. They continued searching. Over the next few days they found 3 more objects. The rope that Matthias had been carrying. It was wrapped around the foot of a tree, almost a kilometer west of the hat. Intact, no knots, as if it had been placed there, not dropped. Tomas's machete, stuck in the base of a thick tree trunk, blade clean, handle firm, no sign of having been used. And the lantern. The oil lantern Tomas had been carrying was found on the 6th day, near the stream. It was off, empty, but not broken, not dented, just abandoned. No bodies were found, no remains of clothing, no traces of blood, no bones. The forest had swallowed 3 men whole and left no trace. The search continued for 2 weeks, then 3, then a month. They called in trackers from Gualeguaychú. They brought sniffer dogs from a nearby ranch. The dogs entered the woods, sniffed Eliseo's clothes that Clara had given them, and began to follow a trail. And then they stopped, in the same place where the footprints had stopped. The dogs began to whine. They backed away. They refused to move forward. One of them, an old and experienced retriever, sat on the ground and began to howl. He had never done that before. The last official day of the search was June 15th, 1892, 7 weeks after the disappearance. The deputy sheriff of Gualeguaychú, a man named Don Hilario Mendez, came personally to Pueblo del Sauce. He gathered the men of the village. He spoke softly, respectfully. He said there was nothing more to be done. He said the forest was large, that accidents happened, that perhaps they had gotten lost, fallen into a ravine, been attacked by animals, although there was no evidence of this. He said the families needed to accept it. They needed to move on. But before leaving, Don Hilario asked to speak with the clerk, alone. The two locked themselves in the small room at the comisaria. They stayed there for almost an hour. When they came out, the clerk was pale. Don Hilario was serious, tense. Neither of them said what they had talked about. 3 months later, the clerk requested a transfer. He was sent to Paraná. He never returned. In the official files, the case was closed with the following note: disappearance of 3 individuals, cause unknown, bodies not located, investigation suspended due to lack of evidence. But there is an extra note, handwritten in a different handwriting in the margin of the last report. It is unsigned. It has no date. It simply says, they entered before nightfall. That was their mistake. No one knows who wrote it. No one knows what it means. But everyone who read it felt the same thing, that there was something in the forest, something that was not in the reports, something no one wanted to write about. Clara Vargas never accepted it. Every day until the end of her life, she lit a candle in the window, waiting. Tomas never went back to get the books he had left at his aunt's house. Matthias never went back to put out the forge. It burned alone for 3 days until someone threw water on it. And Silent Mountain remained silent. No one else went in there alone. No one else went in after 2 in the afternoon. Not by order, not by law, but out of fear. A fear that no one could name. The village changed after that. Not all at once, not visibly, but slowly, like a crack that gradually opens in a wall. Clara Vargas continued to live in the same house. She raised her 4 children alone. She sewed for others. She did laundry. She accepted help when it was offered, but never asked for it. The children asked about their father in the first few months. She always said the same thing. He went to work far away. He'll be back. After a while, they stopped asking. But every night, without fail, Clara lit a candle in the front window. The neighbors saw it. No one commented. She did this for 36 years, until the day she died. Tomas's aunt sold the house 6 months after his disappearance. She moved to Gualeguaychú. She never returned to Pueblo del Sauce. Before leaving, she left Tomas's books at the church. She told the priest, if he comes back, tell him they're here. The priest kept the books in a wooden box. He placed it under the altar. Tomas never came back to get them. Years later, when the church was demolished, the books were found intact. In French, poetry by Baudelaire, philosophy by Pascal. In the margins of one of the books, there were notes in pencil, small writing, short sentences. One of them said, there are places where time does not pass, it just waits. No one knew what that meant. Matthias's workshop remained closed. No one wanted to buy it. No one wanted to live there. For years, the forge remained cold. The tools rusted. The anvil was covered in dust. Until, on a winter night in 1897, 5 years after the disappearance, someone set fire to the place. They never found out who it was. The workshop burned to ashes. No one tried to rebuild it, but it wasn't just the houses that changed. It was the people. Don Aparicio, the man who had seen the three for the last time, started drinking. Not much, just enough to sleep. He said he couldn't close his eyes anymore without seeing the three men walking toward the hill. He said that in his dreams they turned and looked at him, and they said nothing. They just looked. Eugenio Rochas, the tracker who had led the search, moved south the following year. He went to work on a ranch near Buenos Aires. He never hunted again. He never entered a forest again. When people asked him why, he looked away. Once, when he was drunk, he said to a friend, I saw things in there that I can't explain. What things? I can't talk about it. If I talk about it, I'll have to remember. He never explained. The village priest, Father Esteban, an old man with a white beard and a soft voice, began to say special masses every Friday. Masses for the disappeared. But he never said dead. Always disappeared, as if there was still hope, or as if there was something worse than death. In the months following the disappearance, stories emerged, not legends, not inventions, testimonies, small, strange, impossible to ignore. A woman named Dominga Ruiz, who lived in the last house before the hill, swore she heard voices on the night of April 23rd. Men's voices. She was lying down, almost asleep, when she heard them. They weren't screams. They were normal voices, talking, even laughing. But they came from far away, from inside the hill, and it was past midnight. She told her husband. He said it was her imagination. But Dominga insisted. I heard them. It was them. I'm sure. No one believed her. But she never changed her story. 2 months later, an 11-year-old boy, the son of the store owner, said he saw a man standing at the edge of the hill at dusk. The boy was coming back from school. It was already getting dark. And there he was, a man, with his back turned, standing at the entrance to the trail. He was wearing a black hat. The boy ran home, scared. He told his father. They went back together with a flashlight. There was no one there. But on the ground, right where the boy said the man had been standing, there was a mark, a footprint, alone, a boot, a large size, like Eliseo's. Don Hilario Mendez, the deputy, returned to Pueblo del Sauce in August, not because of the case, but to resolve another administrative issue. While he was there, he asked to speak to the clerk again. This time, Don Hilario looked tired, older. He had deep, dark circles under his eyes. He asked the clerk, "Have you ever thought about requesting a transfer?" The clerk frowned. "Why?" Don Hilario looked out the window, at the hill. Then he said, "Because I'm going to ask for mine." And he did. 3 months later, he was transferred to Santa Fe. He never returned to the region. The clerk, whose name was Bernardino Salas, wrote down everything he heard in the months following the disappearance. Testimonies, rumors, strange reports, not because he believed them, but because he thought they should be recorded. He wrote down, The story of the woman who heard voices. The story of the boy who saw the man with the hat. The story of the dogs that refused to go on. The story of the footprints that stopped in the middle of nowhere. And one last story, which he never included in the official report. Bernardino wrote by hand on a separate sheet of paper kept inside a book. On May 17th, I returned alone to the hill. I don't know why. I just felt I had to. I walked to the point where the footprints ended. I stood there, still, waiting. I don't know for what. After a few minutes I heard something. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't an animal, it was like breathing. Slow, deep, coming from everywhere. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I was out of the forest. I never went back, and I never will. This sheet was found years later when Bernardino died. It was inside a Bible, folded, yellowed. On the back, he had written a single sentence. Something lives in there, and it's waiting. But the revelation, if we can call it that, did not come from testimonies. It came from something much simpler, much more human. In 1903, 11 years after the disappearance, a man appeared in Pueblo del Sos. Old, white beard, shaky hands. He sought out Clara Vargas. He said he had known Eliseo, that he had worked with him years before in another village, that he had heard about the disappearance, and that he needed to tell her something. The man said that 3 weeks before Eliseo disappeared, he had received a letter from him. In that letter, Eliseo wrote, "There's something wrong with that hill. I went in there alone a few days ago. I didn't find what I expected. I found something different. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like I shouldn't go back. But I'll have to go back. I need the wood. I need the money. I hope I'm wrong." The man showed Clara the letter. She read it. She folded it slowly. She gave it back. Then she looked at him and asked, "Why did you wait so long to show me this?" The man lowered his eyes. "Because I was afraid." Clara didn't ask what he was afraid of. She already knew. Pueblo del Sos ceased to exist in 1928. There was no catastrophe. There was no epidemic. There was no war. People simply left, one family at a time, 1 year after another. First the young people, then the merchants, then the old people. The church closed, the school closed, the store closed. In 1930, only 4 houses remained inhabited. In 1935, none. Today, all that remains of Pueblo del Sos are ruins covered with weeds, brick walls without roofs, stone foundations invaded by roots, a small cemetery surrounded by rusty wire with rotting wooden crosses and names that time has erased. And to the west, less than a kilometer from the ruins, is Silent Mountain, still there, still silent. Clara Vargas died in 1928 at the age of 63. She never left the house. She never stopped lighting the candle in the window. She never stopped waiting. On the night she died, her eldest daughter, who had returned to care for her in her final months, said that Clara woke up suddenly, sat up in bed, looked out the window and whispered, "He's back." Her daughter asked, "Who, Mom?" Clara smiled. A strange smile, distant. "Eliseo." Then she lay down again, and never woke up again. Her daughter looked out the window. There was no one outside, only darkness and silence. Eliseo and Clara's 4 children grew up. They got married, they had children, they moved on. But none of them ever returned to live in Pueblo del Sos. None of them ever entered Monte Silencioso, not even once. When asked why, they changed the subject. The case was never solved. It was never reopened. The files remained stored at the Gualeguaychú police station for decades. Then they were transferred to the provincial archives. Then they were digitized. Today, anyone can access them online. Yellowed reports, handwritten statements, maps drawn in pencil, and that sentence, written in the margin of the last document, "They went in before nightfall." That was the mistake. No one knows who wrote it. No one knows what it means. But everyone who reads it feels something. In the following years, other disappearances occurred in the region. Not many, not enough to cause alarm, but enough to be a pattern. Always near ancient forests. Always men alone. or in small groups, always no bodies, always no traces. In 1897, two brothers disappeared near Concordia. They went into the woods to hunt. They didn't return. They were never found. In 1904, a mule driver disappeared between Paraná and Gualeguay. The last time he was seen, he was camping on the edge of a forest. In the morning, his horse was tied up. The fire was lit, but he was gone. In 1912, three farm workers disappeared on a ranch near Villagay. They entered an area of native forest to repair a fence. They did not return for lunch. They never returned. None of the cases were officially connected, but the files are there, and those who read them understand. There is a theory, unofficial, unscientific, but persistent. A theory that some local historians, folklore researchers, and curious people discuss in whispers. They say there are places where time works differently. Ancient places, where the land has never been touched, where trees have grown for centuries without interruption, where the silence is so deep that it seems to have weight. They say these places hold things, not spirits, not ghosts, but something older, something that was there before men, and that never went away. This theory explains nothing. It solves nothing. But it offers something that official reports could never offer, a reason, even if it is a reason that is impossible to prove, even if it is a reason that no one wants to believe. Eliseo Vargas was 41 when he disappeared. Matias Ibarra was 37. Tomas Acuna was 29. 3 men, 3 lives, 3 stories interrupted in the middle. They weren't heroes. They weren't villains. They were just men who woke up early, who worked hard, who loved or tried to love, who were afraid but kept going. Men like so many others, who one day entered a forest and never returned. Today, Silent Mountain still exists. It is about 6 kilometers from the ruins of Pueblo del Sos. It is protected by law. A nature reserve, no cutting down trees, no hunting. There are trails, there are signs, there are forest rangers. But no one enters after 3 in the afternoon, not because of a rule, because of custom, out of respect, or out of fear. In 2012, a group of biology students from the University of Entre Ríos conducted a study on the flora and fauna of the hill. They spent 3 days camping there. They took measurements, they took photos, they recorded sounds. On the 3rd day, one of the students, a girl named Lucia, woke up at dawn and went to the edge of the camp. She said she heard something. Voices. Not shouting, not crying, just talking, quietly, as if they were coming from far away. She woke up the professor. He heard it too. They recorded it. When they returned to the university, they analyzed the audio. There were voices, but they weren't animals. They were human, speaking Spanish, saying things like, "Let's go. It's getting dark. We need to go back." The audio was archived. It was never published. The professor asked them not to talk about it. Lucia graduated. She changed fields. She never returned to the mountain. The truth is that no one knows what happened to Eliseo, Matias, and Tomas. No one knows if they died, if they got lost, if they fell, if they were attacked. No one knows if the forest took them, or if they simply stayed. But there is something that everyone knows. Everyone who read the case. Everyone who visited the ruins. Everyone who walked to the edge of the hill and stood there, listening to the silence. There is something in that place. Something that has no name. Something that waits. Clara Vargas waited 36 years. She lit a candle every night, and she never lost hope. Maybe she was right. Maybe Eliseo came back. Just not in the way she imagined, not in the way anyone imagines. Today, the ruins of Pueblo del Sos are visited by few. Historians, curious people, photographers. They walk among the fallen walls. They take pictures of the crosses in the cemetery. They read the names that can still be read. And then, before leaving, they look west, towards Monte Silencioso, and they feel the weight of that silence. They feel that there is something inside that should not be disturbed. They feel that those 3 men are somehow still there, waiting, or being waited for. No one enters the mountain after 3 in the afternoon. No one enters alone. No one stays after dark. not out of fear of the unknown, but out of respect for what has already been lost. And perhaps that is what the case of Eliseo Vargas, Matias Ibarra, and Tomas Acuna teaches us, that there are places we should not go, not because they are forbidden, but because some doors, once opened, never close, and some forests never give back what they take. On April 23, 1892, 3 men entered a forest before nightfall. They thought they had time. They thought they knew the way. They thought they would be back before dinner. But the forest had other plans, and time stopped counting.